So, I want you to do something right now. Just, take a second and look around the room you're currently sitting in.
Yeah, really look at it.
Right. Look at the walls, the furniture, the window, maybe the way the light is hitting the floor. Now, I want you to think internally, how are you describing the space to yourself?
Like what words are actually popping into your head?
Exactly. I mean, are you staring at a blank white wall in a cramped apartment? Are you slumping into this massive oversized sofa in a huge open living room?
Or maybe looking out of a high-rise window, at a sprawling urban grid.
Yeah, whatever space you are occupying right now, the specific words you use to map it out, well, they say a lot more about your psychology than you might think.
Oh, absolutely. Because the vocabulary we use to describe our physical surroundings, it's never just a collection of neutral labels.
No, not at all.
Every single noun, every adjective, every preposition we apply to our living spaces is deeply embedded with, our economic reality, our psychological defenses, and, well, our broader place in human society.
Which is exactly why today we're doing a deep dive into the hidden code of how we talk about home.
Right.
We've got this fascinating linguistic framework from our source material to explore today, and it basically tracks how our conceptualization of shelter evolves, right?
Yeah, it scales up in 4 distinct tiers.
Exactly. It scales all the way from the foundational, immediate physical reality of like walls and furniture, and then it moves outward into the complexities of lifestyle.
And then upward, into the brutal realities in the housing market.
Right, the money part. And finally, it reaches these massive macro-level debates about, urban planning and the ultimate psychology of belonging.
I mean, we're basically tracing a linguistic evolution that perfectly mirrors the human experience.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
We start with the sheer biological imperative of finding shelter. Then we progress to building a community, and ultimately, we try to forge an identity within a defined space.
It's a journey from just identifying the simple placement of a chair in a room to dissecting the sociology of an entire city block.
It's huge, yeah.
So let's start right at the bedrock, the foundation. The source material identifies this as the A2 level.
Right, the very beginning.
Because before we can get into the emotional weight of a home, we have to deal with the absolute physical reality of a structure. I mean, we're talking about the initial cognitive step of just identifying the enclosure.
Like what kind of box are you in?
Exactly. Are you in a house? Are you in an apartment?
Yeah.
Or, a flat? Immediately, we have to establish those physical parameters.
Because it is entirely about drawing boundaries. I mean, think about early human development. Or even just the way a child first learns to understand their environment.
Okay. Yeah.
The primary objective is spatial awareness and survival. Before you can attach any kind of emotional resonance to a space, you have to establish the physical limits, the spatial relationships within them.
Like laying down an X and Y axis.
Exactly. You have to know where the walls are before you can decorate them.
Right. It's like drawing a 2-dimensional architectural floor plan.
I love
that analogy because at this foundational tier, our language is just intensely objective.
Very factual.
Yeah, we rely heavily on prepositions to lock things into place. We say, the sofa is in the living room, or the kitchen is on the first floor.
Or the bed is against the wall, right?
Exactly. We're simply dropping pins on a map.
And if you look at the universality of those pins, it's really striking. The linguistic framework highlights the essential rooms that appear across almost all modern cultures.
Right. The big ones.
Yeah, you got the living room, the kitchen, the bed, or the bathroom. And, for those lucky enough to have exterior space, the garden or the yard.
Sure.
What we're really describing here, beneath all that vocabulary, is the basic operating system of the human animal.
Oh, I like that. We're partitioning our survival needs into separate boxes.
Precisely. Because no matter where you are geographically, the human body requires specific zones. We require a secure, defensible space for our most vulnerable state, which is sleep. So that gives us the bedroom, complete with the bed and the wardrobe.
The sleep box, basically.
Yeah, the sleep box. And then we require a space dedicated to the preparation of sustenance and, the management of fire or heat.
Which is the kitchen, obviously.
Right, with its fridge, its cooker, stove, its sink.
Yeah.
And then we require a separate sanitary zone for hygiene, which is the bathroom. These divisions literally form the absolute biological bedrock of habitation.
It's just fascinating when you strip it down like that, because we think of a coffee table or a TV in the living room as these modern lifestyle choices.
Oh, for sure.
But functionally, we're just furnishing the communal gathering space, right? It's the modern equivalent of sitting around the fire pit.
Yeah, the TV is basically the glowing fire we all stare at.
That's exactly it. We populate these rooms with the absolute nuts and bolts of existence. The sofa, the desk, the fridge. But, going back to that 2D floor plan analogy, this language, while highly precise and totally necessary, it kind of lacks the three-dimensional color of actual human life.
It's just a blueprint.
Right.
It gives you the dimensions, the layout, and the inventory, basically.
Right.
But it tells you absolutely nothing about the human experience unfolding within those lines.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I can tell you that I have a sofa in my living room, but that objective fact doesn't tell you what it feels like to sit on that sofa after a grueling 10-hour workday, you know?
Not at all.
The foundational language is just the container. But of course, once you build the walls and place the furniture on your little 2D grid, you inevitably have to walk over and look out the window.
You have to step outside.
Yeah, because that container doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in a community.
Which pulls us right out of the foundation and into the second tier, what the source material calls the B1 Explorer level.
The Explorer level, right.
And the linguistic shift here is profound. We move from mapping the internal physical space to negotiating our location and our lifestyle.
Oh, totally.
We start creating contrasts between the city center, the downtown core, and the suburbs, or even the countryside.
This is where the language gets inherently judgmental, I think, or at least highly subjective.
Oh, very subjective, yeah.
We stop just listing furniture and start talking about the vibe of a place.
The vibe, exactly.
We use adjectives that begin to paint a picture of our daily existence. So we contrast a lively neighborhood, one humming with shops and restaurants and foot traffic, with a quiet, heavily residential area.
Right.
And suddenly proximity becomes a currency, you know, like how close are the parks? Where's the nearest supermarket? Can I walk to the gym?
Notice how the physical space is now directly interacting with your identity and really your compromises.
Compromises, yeah.
At the foundational level, everyone needs a bedroom to sleep. That's a biological constant.
Right.
But at this explorer level, you are forced to make deliberate choices about how you want to live.
Right, because you can't have it all.
Exactly. Choosing to live in the quiet residential suburbs versus choosing an apartment right in the lively downtown, that reflects a really significant lifestyle compromise.
You are constantly weighing trade-offs.
Yes. You're deciding what matters more to your personal equilibrium. The tranquility and maybe larger square footage of the outskirts, or the proximity to the action, the culture, and the amenities of the center.
Yeah.
And the adjectives we use here, like modern, traditional, spacious, they start to reflect our aspirations. You know?
Right.
We want a place with character. We want a great view or a balcony because we want our private space to have this pleasant interface with the public world.
And then there's the word cozy. I find it incredibly telling how often we use that word to describe homes.
Oh, cozy is a fascinating word.
Right. It usually implies something small but warm and comfortable. It's almost a psychological defense mechanism.
How do you mean?
Well, if an apartment is objectively tiny and cramped, calling it cozy instantly reclaims it as a positive, secure space, you know?
Oh, totally. It frames the lack of physical space as an embrace rather than a restriction.
Right. Instead of being trapped, you're being hugged by the walls.
That's a great way to put it.
But this explorer tier also drops a massive dose of reality onto our heads, doesn't it? Because you can't just wander around picking lively neighborhoods and cozy apartments without hitting the brick wall of logistics.
The financial logistics.
Namely, the money, yeah. This is why we have to talk about renting from a landlord versus owning, and the financial necessity of living with flatmates or roommates.
The introduction of economic logistics fundamentally alters the linguistic landscape of the home. It really does.
See, I really struggle with the premise of finding a true sense of home in a rental.
Yeah, it's tough.
If I'm paying a landlord every single month just for the right to occupy a space, I'm fundamentally just borrowing those walls.
Right.
It's like a temporary subscription to a shelter. Can a person ever actually map their core identity onto a space that someone else legally owns and, frankly, can take away from them?
Well, that freedom you're describing, that is a recognized psychological hurdle. When you're renting, the space is inherently transient.
Yeah.
You're forced to negotiate your identity, not just within the physical boundaries of the rooms, but within the temporal boundaries of your lease agreement.
Right. The clock is ticking.
Exactly. Your psychological roots can only go so deep when there's an external authority, the landlord, who ultimately dictates your presence there.
And then you add flatmates to that equation, and the friction just multiplies.
Oh, exponentially. When you're sharing a space with flatmates purely to mitigate the high cost of living, you are constantly negotiating the foundation.
Right, you're back to negotiating the A2 level.
Yes, you're sharing the fridge, you're sharing the bathroom, the living room, You might find an apartment that has a great view in a lively neighborhood, but if you have to retreat to your bedroom just to experience total privacy,
then the entire apartment isn't your home, just your room is. It feels like you're hovering slightly above the floor plan, just unable to fully land. You're an explorer, sure, but you're constantly aware that you're just passing through.
Which perfectly explains the intense, almost biological drive to stop borrowing space and start claiming it permanently.
Which propels us directly into the third tier in this deep dive, the B2 analyst level.
Right.
Because if you want to cease being a temporary occupant and actually become the master of your domain, you have to face the brutal complexities of the housing market.
You really do.
We have to put on our analyst glasses, look at the bank accounts, and just get ruthless. The language here shifts entirely to economics and design.
Money and aesthetics.
Yeah, we're talking about the high cost of living, the barrier of exorbitant house prices, and the grueling process of securing a mortgage or bank loan just to get in the game. And there's this one phrase that dominates the discourse at this level. The property ladder.
The property ladder. It is a masterclass in societal idioms.
It really is.
It perfectly encapsulates a deeply ingrained, almost mythological expectation of upward mobility through real estate,
Right.
The metaphor of a ladder implies a natural expected vertical progression. You start at the bottom rung, perhaps buying a small apartment or a fixer-upper.
Which is, an old house needing massive repairs.
Exactly. Then, through time and the accumulation of equity, you climb, you sell, you upgrade, you move higher up the ladder to something bigger and better.
But framing it as a ladder feels almost deceptive today, doesn't it? I mean, if we look at the data on current housing markets and the lived experience of younger generations, getting on the property ladder doesn't feel like climbing a stable set of rungs.
No, the source material explicitly calls it a daunting prospect for young people today.
Daunting is an understatement. It feels less like a ladder and more like a high-stakes, exhausting game of snakes and ladders.
The mechanics of the market have definitely shifted dramatically, making the metaphor way less reliable.
Right. I mean, you spend years scraping together a down payment for a mortgage, which, by the way, is just a massive, multi-decade debt anchor you willingly tie to your ankle.
Basically, yeah.
And you finally get your foot on that bottom rung. But a sudden spike in interest rates or a massive repair bill on that fixer-upper, it acts like a giant snake on the board.
And you slide all the way back down.
Exactly. You slide all the way back down to the bottom. The bottom rung has been pulled up so incredibly high that for many, ownership isn't a ladder at all. It's a fortress they're just locked out of.
And this intense financial barrier, it really explains why when people finally do manage to secure a property, or even when they decide to aggressively commit to a long-term rental,
the psychological shift is massive.
It's seismic. Once the economic anxiety is momentarily settled, a massive wave of energy is redirected into aesthetics and design.
The renovation phase.
Yes.
This is where we bring out the sledgehammers. We start choosing highly specific color schemes, redecorating, knocking down walls to create open plan layouts, and obsessing over maximizing natural light.
Oh, the natural light obsession is huge.
But let's dig into the why of this. Why are we so driven to rip out walls? What is the actual psychology driving the obsession with open plan living?
Well, if we look past the superficial trends of interior design, the drive toward open plan layouts is a profound psychological shift in how we socialize.
Okay, how so?
Historically, houses were highly segmented. You had a separate kitchen, a separate dining room, a formal parlor. That architecture reinforced social hierarchy and separation.
Right, it separated those preparing the food from those consuming it.
Precisely. The walls literally divided the labor. So knocking down those walls removes the physical barriers between sustenance, relaxation, and socialization.
It makes the space feel infinitely more communal.
Yep, exactly. The person cooking the meal in the kitchen is no longer isolated. They're part of the ongoing conversation in the living room. It engineers a feeling of inclusivity and reduces feelings of confinement.
And the obsession with natural light plays right into that engineered environment. We want floor-to-ceiling windows, skylights, glass doors. It's almost a biological imperative, isn't it?
Absolutely it is. We are diurnal creatures, right?
Right.
Our circadian rhythms, our mood regulation, our energy levels, they are entirely tethered to sunlight. By maximizing natural light, we are manipulating our physical environment to engineer a specific neurochemical state.
We're basically building boxes that try to mimic the physiological benefits of being outdoors.
While still maintaining the security of being indoors, exactly.
We're desperately trying to make these spaces feel homely. to make them feel like a true reflection of our inner selves. But this brings up a massive tension in the linguistic framework, a tension that plays out in almost every single shared household.
Ah, yes. The battle over atmosphere.
The war between the minimalist aesthetic and the cluttered space.
This is where interior design really intersects with behavioral psychology. The minimalist aesthetic, which is, characterized by simplicity, clean lines, possessing very few items, it stands in direct opposition to a space full of collected things.
Which can easily tip into feeling messy or cluttered, right?
Exactly.
I think we often praise minimalism and look down on clutter, but I really want to defend the clutter for a moment.
Okay, go for it.
Because the framework points out a constant battle between partners over this. One person wants empty, pristine white counters, and the other wants to keep every concert ticket, every souvenir, every slightly chipped mug they've ever owned.
Right, the collectors.
We call it clutter, but isn't that just a physical manifestation of memory?
You're describing the psychology of nesting, actually. For many people, objects are anchors. They hold emotional resonance, history, and narrative. Surrounding oneself with these objects, even to the point of what a strict minimalist would deem clutter, it creates a physical barrier of memories.
It feels secure.
It provides tactile evidence of a life lived.
It's like building a psychological fort out of your own history. I love that.
Exactly. Whereas the drive toward extreme minimalism often stems from a completely different psychological need, which is the need for control.
Control, yeah.
The modern world outside the front door is chaotic, unpredictable, overwhelming. For the minimalist, coming home to a space devoid of visual noise, devoid of excess physical objects, is a way to reclaim agency.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
They're creating a controlled, serene vacuum to counter the chaos of the external world.
So the battle over the coffee table isn't really about the coffee table at all.
Never.
It's one partner trying to build a comforting nest of memories and the other trying to establish a controlled perimeter of calm.
Exactly.
We go through all of this, the mortgages, the renovations, the negotiations over throw pillows, as a deeply human attempt to stamp our absolute authority on one tiny patch of the earth.
We engineer the microenvironment to absolute perfection.
We're basically declaring, I cannot control the economy, I cannot control the weather, but inside this open plan layout, I am the ultimate authority.
But as the framework inevitably reveals, that sense of total control is an illusion if we fail to consider the macro environment.
Oh, right.
Because no matter how perfectly you have curated your minimalist living room or how much natural light you've invited into your kitchen, that physical structure is inextricably bound to the massive sweeping forces of the city it occupies.
Which means we have to zoom out. We have to leave the living room, take the elevator all the way up to the roof, and look at the whole city grid.
We arrive at the macro view, the C1, C2 summit of this conceptual framework in our deep dive today.
The big picture.
Yes. We transition from the discourse of individual houses and personal aesthetics into the realm of citywide phenomena, sociology, and urban planning.
The scale of the language shifts dramatically here. We're no longer debating whether you should have a small garden in the suburbs. We're debating the global necessity of preserving green spaces versus the urgent need for high-density housing.
Right.
We're looking at massive challenges like accommodating rapidly growing populations and the resulting threat of urban sprawl.
And urban sprawl is a perfect example of how micro-level desires aggregate into macro-level crises.
How so?
Well, at the explorer level, we discuss the understandable desire for a spacious home in a quiet residential suburb.
Right.
It's a very common human aspiration. But when millions of individuals simultaneously act on that exact same desire, the collective result is urban sprawl.
The uncontrolled, low-density expansion of cities outward into the surrounding countryside.
Exactly. It's the paradox of the suburbs. Everyone moves out there to be closer to nature, and in doing so, they collectively pave over the nature they came to enjoy.
Wow. Yeah, and that sprawling geography necessitates massive infrastructure, long commutes, heavy reliance on automobiles.
Which then loops back to affect the environment and the economy. The individual desire for space directly conflicts with the societal need for efficiency and environmental preservation.
Which brings us to how we actually build these cities to house everyone. The architectural philosophies. I find this part incredibly compelling. Specifically, the critique of building aesthetics versus functionality.
Yes, the old debate.
The framework highlights this famous architectural principle that form must follow function. The idea that the physical shape of a building should be entirely dictated by its intended purpose.
Right. Historically, when cities faced massive population booms, particularly post-war, they needed to house a lot of people very quickly and very efficiently.
So the function was just high-density shelter.
Exactly. This led to architectural movements like brutalism, characterized by massive, imposing, unadorned concrete structures.
Yeah, the framework notes that these designs can often appear austere, and I think austere is putting it very mildly.
They are severe, they are strictly functional, devoid of the decorative traditional elements that characterize earlier architecture.
Okay, well, I have a major issue with how form follows function is applied here.
Let's hear it.
I hear that phrase used to defend some of the most depressing concrete monoliths in our cities. If a building's design is purely mathematically efficient, like if it successfully stacks 2,000 human beings into a concrete grid, but the resulting form is so austere and severe that it makes the inhabitants feel like they're entering a penal colony, hasn't the form fundamentally failed the function?
That is a crucial distinction, actually.
Right. Because if the actual function of a home is to provide safety, comfort, and psychological well-being, and you build a towering concrete block that inspires dread and alienation, then your form isn't following the function at all. It's only following the math.
You're hitting on the exact tension that architects and urban planners wrestle with constantly.
Really?
Yeah. The initial utopian vision behind brutalism was actually deeply egalitarian. It was about providing solid, functional, equitable housing for the masses. But as you point out, defining function purely by the numbers ignores the psychological function of the space. When the environment is built exclusively for density, it strips away the cozy, personalized elements we discussed in the earlier tiers. It prioritizes the collective over the individual psyche.
And when you have that much tension between the physical structures of a city and the people living in them, the sociology of the city starts to shift. Neighborhoods evolve, sometimes violently. Which brings us to the vocabulary of gentrification.
Yes. The language surrounding gentrification is perhaps the most complex and contested in the entire framework.
And we have to be really, really clear here to our listeners. We are absolutely not taking a side on gentrification in this deep dive.
No, not at all. We are strictly maintaining impartiality.
We are just reporting how the source material outlines it because the framework presents a dual definition. It notes that it is a highly complex phenomenon. So let's just look closely at how the language itself frames this because the vocabulary holds two wildly opposing realities at the exact same time. On paper, gentrification is described as wealthier individuals moving into a poorer, often working-class area and subsequently improving the housing and the infrastructure.
Linguistically, it is often framed through the lens of urban renewal.
Right, renewal.
The terminology points to freshly painted facades, new businesses, upgraded amenities, rising property values. From a purely structural standpoint, the physical buildings are being preserved and enhanced.
But the very same process, often the exact same sequence of events, is also defined by its significant social cost. Because upgrading the physical structures inherently raises the cost of living, which triggers displacement.
The vocabulary of displacement is the shadow side of urban renewal. The physical neighborhood looks better, but the original inhabitants, the community that gave the neighborhood its identity in the first place, can no longer afford to exist there.
Right. The language perfectly captures this brutal duality. A neighborhood can receive a fresh coat of paint, a new artisan coffee shop, renovated apartments, but that physical upgrade serves as the mechanism that displaces the original inhabitants. The tension isn't just in the streets, it's baked right into the words we use to describe what's happening. The dual definition of urban renewal and social cost.
And that sociological tension reveals something profound about the nature of our entire inquiry today.
What's that?
Well, if a neighborhood's physical buildings can remain and even be improved, while the core community is completely displaced, it proves that the physical structures are not the actual home.
Oh, wow. That is the ultimate realization, isn't it? If the walls can be bought, renovated, and gentrified out from under you, then the true essence of home cannot be made of bricks and mortar.
Which naturally brings us to the final, deepest layer of the framework. Their philosophy and psychology of belonging.
The summit.
Yes. This is where we completely detach from the 2D floor plans, the property ladders, the concrete grids. We realize that fundamentally, a home is a psychological state.
The framework dives into some deeply emotional territory here, starting with nostalgia. I mean, think about the intense feeling of nostalgia you get when you think about your childhood home. If you really analyze that feeling, you aren't pining for the specific architectural layout of the hallway or the brand of the cooker in the kitchen, are you?
No, of course not. You're nostalgic for the feeling of safety that space provided. You're yearning for a time when the complexities of the macro world, the mortgages, the societal pressures, the urban sprawl, were held at bay by those walls.
The physical house is just the vessel that contained those formative memories.
Exactly. And that idea of the vessel becomes incredibly clear when the framework explores the concept of diaspora communities.
Oh, yeah, let's talk about that.
This is perhaps the most powerful proof that home is portable. For diaspora communities, people who have been displaced or who have migrated across the globe away from their geographic origins, the concept of home is entirely decoupled from a specific physical structure or even a specific continent.
Because if you have lost the physical land, human psychology forces you to rebuild the home out of intangibles, right?
Precisely. Home becomes a shared language. It becomes a specific set of cultural practices, a shared history, or a particular piece of music. It becomes the traditional food you cook, regardless of the kitchen you happen to be standing in.
Wow.
The community itself becomes the architecture of the home. It is a psychological and cultural ecosystem that you carry with you, overlaying it onto whatever physical space you currently occupy.
It's beautiful, really. It renders the physical structure almost secondary. The apartment or the house is just the temporary theater where the actual performance of home takes place.
Very well said.
But, and this is a crucial pivot here, the framework also insists that the physical space still has an incredibly vital psychological job to do in the modern era. Like, we haven't outgrown the need for walls.
Oh, not at all. In fact, the psychological function of those walls has arguably never been more important.
Right.
The framework emphasizes that in our current reality, which is characterized as an increasingly connected, hyper-demanding, relentless world, the primary function of the home is to act as a sanctuary.
A place to disconnect.
A place where you can drop the performative masks you wear for society and return to your authentic self.
I think about it like a psychological airlock on a spaceship.
Oh.
Or, a massive battery charger.
An airlock. I like that.
Yeah. You spend your entire day out in the chaotic macro environment. You're navigating the urban sprawl. You're dealing with the high cost of living. You're visually processing austere architecture. And you're constantly bombarded by the demands of a hyper-connected digital society. You are constantly draining your battery.
The external world demands constant performance and vigilance. It's exhausting.
Right. And so you travel back to your physical structure, you open the front door, and you step through the airlock. The door closes behind you, shutting out the city, the economy, the noise.
And seal it off.
You step into your sanctuary, whether it's a tiny, cozy, cluttered room or a spacious, minimalist, open-plan house. You plug yourself in. You are surrounded by your anchors, your memories, your chosen aesthetic. And in that highly controlled environment, you finally have the permission to just be.
You recharge your authentic self.
Exactly, so that you have the armor to face the world again tomorrow.
That connects beautifully back to the very foundation we started with today. Initially, we viewed those physical walls purely as biological necessities, keeping the rain out, keeping predators at bay.
Right.
But by the time we reached this psychological summit, we realized those same walls are doing immense psychological heavy lifting. They're keeping the exhausting demands of modern existence at bay.
It is truly staggering to see how this all connects. Let's just, take a breath and trace the path we just walked in this deep dive.
It is a remarkable linguistic and psychological progression.
It really is. We started by simply drawing lines on a paper. We placed a sofa in a living room, mapped out the kitchen and the bathroom, defining the sheer biological necessity of shelter.
The A2 foundation.
Right. Then we stepped outside. We explored the neighborhood, weighing the cozy quiet of the suburbs against the lively energy of the city center, and we unpacked the deep psychological friction of paying a landlord for borrowed space.
From there, the human drive for ownership forced us into the analyst role. We navigated the treacherous snakes and ladders of the property market, took on mortgages, and wielded sledgehammers to create open-plan, natural, light-filled spaces.
Battling over minimalism and clutter in a desperate bid to establish control over our environment.
Exactly. And then we had to face the reality that our controlled environments are at the mercy of the city.
The macro view. We zoomed out, debating the collective consequences of urban sprawl, challenging the severe aesthetics of brutalist architecture, and navigating the tense dual vocabulary of gentrification, where urban renewal and social cost exist side by side.
Until we finally turned inward, realizing that beyond the concrete and the real estate markets, the ultimate expression of home is a psychological sanctuary. A portable sense of belonging rooted in nostalgia, culture, and the vital need for a private space to recharge our authentic selves.
So as we wrap this up, I want to ask you, our listener, to do what we did at the very beginning. Look around the room you are in one more time. Really look at it.
See it with new eyes.
Whether you are in a cramped, cluttered rental shared with 3 flatmates, or sitting in a spacious, perfectly minimalist living room in the quiet countryside, this space is not just a box you sleep in.
No, it's not.
Every object, every wall, and every descriptive word you use is a node in a massive web connecting you to urban theory, global economic trends, and your own deepest psychological need for belonging. You are sitting at the absolute center of this entire framework.
You are the human element that gives the 2D blueprint its third dimension.
But I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, something that builds on everything we've just unpacked. We just concluded that the highest, most crucial purpose of a modern home is to serve as an airlock, right? A private sanctuary where we can completely disconnect from an increasingly demanding, hyper-connected world.
A guaranteed space for privacy and authenticity.
Exactly. But look around that room again. What happens to that sanctuary as we increasingly fill our homes with smart devices?
Oh, wow.
We buy refrigerators that track our groceries, televisions that monitor our viewing habits, voice assistants listening in the living room, and security cameras syncing to the cloud from our front doors. If the very definition of a home is a space that allows you to disconnect from the external world, aren't these devices fundamentally breaching the whole of the airlock?
They're letting the world right back in.
Are we paying a premium to voluntarily tear down the very psychological walls that make a house a home? Think about that tonight. Is your sanctuary actually as disconnected as you need it to be? So for the vast majority of human history, the idea of, a mother, a father, and 2 kids living completely alone in an isolated house together wouldn't just be considered weird.
Right, it would have been totally alien.
Yeah, it would have been considered a recipe for absolute failure, a terrifying vulnerability. Yet today, we look at that exact setup and we call it the ideal nuclear family.
We put it on a pedestal.
We really do. And it makes you wonder, how did we get our fundamental blueprint of human connection so wildly miscalibrated? Because when you think about it, family is the very first socio-political reality any of us ever experiences.
It absolutely is.
It dictates our baseline identity, our immediate survival, and, the original filter through which we perceive the rest of the world. It's essentially the factory floor where our deepest psychological wiring is laid down.
It is the ultimate baseline. And I mean, the vocabulary we use to describe that baseline isn't just some random assortment of words we toss around at holiday parties. It is a highly specific, deeply revealing conceptual map. And that's our mission for today's deep dive. We're doing a complete deconstruction of that map based on this really fascinating stack of sociological and psychological source material we've got.
And it is a massive stack of material.
Oh, it really is. We are going to trace the whole evolution of how humans understand the concept of family. So starting from the rigid architectural taxonomy we use to classify our relatives and moving right through the active mechanisms of how a family actually shapes a brain.
Building all the way up to the modern, highly complex deconstruction of what actually constitutes a true kinship bond.
Exactly.
So, to you, the listener, whether you are currently sitting in the middle of a massive, chaotic, multi-generational household that feels like a small republic, or, maybe you live in a very quiet space with just 1 or 2 chosen people, this deep dive is designed to hand you the exact conceptual tools to analyze your own ecosystem.
Because everyone has an ecosystem.
Right, everyone does. We are going to break down the language and the hidden structures that define the most essential bonds in your life.
But before we can get into the heavy psychology of things like intergenerational trauma or the philosophy of chosen families, we have to establish the primary architecture. We have to look at the foundational nodes of the human social network.
Right, which starts with the immediate and extended family. You really have to map the territory before you can analyze the soil.
Okay, so let's map it.
Well, the taxonomy of kinship, dividing the world into immediate family like parents, siblings, spouses, and children, versus the extended network of, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins, that is a universal human reflex.
We all do it instinctively.
Yeah, but sociologically, what we are actually doing when we use these terms is establishing a static map of biological and immediate legal connections. It is a rigid classification system based entirely on distance from the self.
Right. It's a coordinate system. Like if I meet you at a conference and tell you, I have 2 older brothers. I haven't actually told you anything about who I am as a person.
No, not really. But I have instantly established my coordinates in the human social web. I've planted a flag. It's just this very clean, organized way to present a fundamentally chaotic biological reality to a complete stranger.
It's highly efficient. But, the danger of that efficiency is that this architectural taxonomy is entirely devoid of emotional reality.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a binary measure, like you are either my uncle or you are not. It doesn't measure whether that uncle is a profound mentor to me or someone I actively avoid at every single gathering.
It can't.
Exactly. It is simply the baseline structural fact of our existence.
That structural fact really reminds me of looking at the architectural blueprint for a house.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, because the blueprint is incredibly specific. It shows you exactly where the load-bearing walls are, the dimensions of the kitchen, how the hallway connects to the living room.
Very precise.
Right, but a blueprint is fundamentally dead. It cannot tell you what it actually feels like to live inside that house.
It doesn't give you the atmosphere.
Exactly. It doesn't tell you if the kitchen smells like garlic and onion and feels warm and inviting, or if the living room is constantly tense and freezing cold. The taxonomy tells us the structure, but it completely fails to capture the lived reality.
The structure is really just the prerequisite for the experience. But humans are meaning-making machines. And we have a very bad habit of looking at a static structural blueprint and immediately projecting a psychological profile onto it.
We definitely do.
We take a biological fact and try to turn it into a personality trait.
Wait, okay, so if we use a basic identifier like only child, we aren't just stating a structural fact then, are we? We're instantly applying a whole invisible curriculum to that person.
Oh, instantly.
Because if someone tells me they are an only child, I have to admit a part of my brain immediately starts making assumptions about their ability to share, their independence, or their comfort with solitude.
You're filling in the blanks.
Right, I'm projecting an entire lived experience onto a structural coordinate. Doesn't this rigid labeling system actively distort our understanding of the actual people within it?
It absolutely distorts it. The moment you use a label like only child or even oldest brother, society attaches an immense amount of unearned psychological baggage to it.
Just right out of the gate.
Yeah, the static map provides a data point, 0 siblings, and people immediately extrapolate a deficit model from that. They assume the only child lacks the crucial socialization of sibling rivalry.
So they must be weird.
Right. The assumption is they must be hyper-independent, perhaps maladjusted in group settings, or totally accustomed to monopolizing resources.
But the data doesn't back that up, does it?
Not at all. Sociological data consistently proves those assumptions fall apart when tested against reality. I mean, an only child in a densely populated neighborhood with a dozen cousins living on the same street has a completely different socialization experience than, say, an only child living on an isolated farm.
The blueprint tricks us into thinking we understand the internal dynamics of the house.
Exactly. We confuse the structure for the story.
But you can't live in a blueprint. So let's look at what happens when people actually move into that structure and start bouncing off the walls. Let's move from the nouns to the verbs.
I like that.
Because a family is fundamentally a mechanism of action. It's how people interact, adapt, and impose their will on each other over decades.
The verbs are definitely where the friction is. And the most critical distinction in understanding the mechanics of a family is the difference between the passive environment and the active curriculum.
Which we mix up all the time.
We do. We commonly use 2 phrases interchangeably, but they represent entirely different cognitive realities. I'm talking about the concept of growing up versus the concept of being brought up.
Right. Growing up is passive. It's the scenery.
Yes.
Like if I say I grew up in a working class neighborhood in Chicago, I'm describing the ambient temperature of my childhood. It's just the setting that happened to me simply because my physical body was located there. It's absorption by osmosis.
Precisely. Growing up is the ambient noise. But being brought up is a deliberate, active imposition of a worldview.
It's intentional.
Very. If you say, my parents brought me up to respect authority and work relentlessly, you are describing a highly intentional psychological curriculum. That is active parenting.
It is the family attempting to overwrite the passive environment with their own specific code of conduct.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
It's the difference between standing in the rain and having someone repeatedly hand you an umbrella while aggressively explaining the physics of water displacement.
That is a very vivid way to put it, but yeah.
One is just an experience, the other is an active lesson. But, this idea of the family curriculum constantly forcing its code onto the next generation plays out visibly, too.
Oh, everywhere.
There's the deep tribal obsession with family resemblance, the whole concept of taking after someone. You see this constantly when a new baby is born.
Everyone gathers around.
Yeah, the entire family crowds around the crib, aggressively trying to map the infant's features onto the existing taxonomy. Like, she has her grandmother's jawline, but she definitely takes after her uncle's nervous energy.
The psychological drive behind taking after someone is fascinating. It really is a primal search for continuity.
Because we're afraid of dying.
Essentially, yes. Humans are acutely aware of their own mortality. When a family identifies that a child takes after an older relative, whether in physical appearance or behavioral temperament, they are verifying that the genetic and behavioral legacy of the tribe is successfully surviving into the future.
It's a mechanism for collective reassurance.
Exactly.
But wait, doesn't that inherently strip the child of their individuality right out of the gate? I mean, if a family constantly reinforces the narrative that you take after your grandfather's volatile temper, they are essentially pre-authorizing your behavior based on the family's historical precedent.
You're handing them a script.
Yeah, you aren't just an individual making a choice anymore. You're the latest iteration of the grandfather's software.
You are touching on the core tension of family life right there. The weight of the legacy versus the autonomy of the individual.
That's a heavy weight.
It is. When a family narrative insists you take after someone, it can easily become a self-fulfilling behavioral script. The child internalizes the expectation. But, this continuity isn't just about genetics or temperament. It is enforced through action.
And the primary mechanism for enforcing that continuity is the family tradition.
Traditions are the behavioral glue.
The big New Year's Eve dinner, the chaotic summer reunions. It's not just about eating the same food, is it?
No, not at all.
It's a forced synchronization of behavior.
Traditions are essentially scheduled maintenance for the social bond. If the extended family is a sprawling network of nodes, traditions are the recurring electrical pulses that keep the network alive.
You have to plug back in.
Right, because without the friction and forced proximity of a family gathering, the branches of the extended family naturally drift apart due to the sheer entropy of modern life. A tradition demands that you pause your individual life to reaffirm your membership in the collective.
Which works beautifully right up until you introduce a completely foreign element into the ecosystem.
Nice.
The in-laws. This is where the structural map and the lived reality experience a massive, unavoidable collision. Because when you get married, you aren't just pairing off with an individual, are you?
Not sociologically speaking.
No, you are smashing two distinct sovereign states together.
The merging of in-laws is the ultimate sociological stress test. You have two separate taxonomies, two distinct sets of environmental growing up, and two completely different active curriculums of being brought up, suddenly forced to share a unified future.
It's like two different engineering firms trying to build a bridge from opposite sides of the river using completely different units of measurement.
That's exactly what it feels like.
Like, one family's tradition is a loud, argumentative, 50-person gathering where love is expressed through aggressive debate. And the other family's tradition is a silent, formal dinner for four where conflict is avoided at all costs.
A total mismatch.
Yeah, when those two models collide, traditions literally become the battleground.
They become the site of intense diplomatic negotiation. The in-law dynamic requires the renegotiation of reality itself.
Which is exhausting.
It is. Which family's definition of a holiday takes precedence? Which curriculum will be applied to the next generation? The friction of in-laws isn't necessarily because the people dislike each other.
Even though it feels like it sometimes.
Right, but it is actually because their underlying assumptions about how a family is supposed to operate are fundamentally incompatible until a new, synthesized culture is negotiated.
Okay, wait, I want to pull a thread on this idea of the curriculum and being brought up, especially when we talk about merging these different worlds.
Sure, go.
If we say someone was brought up to be incredibly disciplined and hardworking, doesn't the very phrase brought up give the architects, the parents, total credit for the final product?
It certainly implies it.
Where does individual agency actually fit into this sociological model? Like, if I build a successful company through sheer grit, is it just because my parents brought me up with a strong work ethic, or is it because I am an autonomous adult making difficult choices every morning?
Well, the language we use inherently biases the credit toward the creators rather than the individual. Brought up implies a sculptor molding clay.
Right, which feels a bit reductive.
It is. Modern developmental psychology heavily disputes the blank slate theory. The curriculum administered by the parents is not directly downloaded into the child's brain without resistance.
There's always pushback.
Always. The individual constantly filters, rejects, or mutates that curriculum. I mean, you can be brought up in an environment of extreme frugality and choose to become incredibly lavish in your adult life, precisely as a rebellion against that curriculum.
So it's about the reaction.
Exactly. The upbringing provides the initial gravity, but the individual always calculates their own escape velocity.
It provides the gravity. I really like that. It's the force you are pushing against, whether you are aligning with it or rebelling against it.
Yeah.
And understanding how that gravity works naturally pushes us deeper into the analytical frameworks of the family. We need to look at the deep dynamics, the historical weight of heritage, and how conflict actually functions within these close-knit units.
This requires stepping back and analyzing the family, not as a collection of individuals, but as a complex system of roles and rules.
Right, taking the wide view.
Exactly. And one of the most hotly debated analytical tools in sociology is the concept of birth order.
Oh, people love talking about birth order.
They do. It's the idea that your chronological entry point into the system dictates the psychological role you will inevitably play.
So the classic archetypes. The oldest is hyper-responsible, the middle child is the forgotten diplomat, and the youngest is the chaotic free spirit.
Precisely. The structural fact of being born first supposedly correlates with a specific set of personality traits. The oldest is expected to lead, to set the standard, to act as a surrogate authority figure.
But doesn't this bring us right back to the only child problem we talked about earlier?
How so?
Well, if the oldest child is continually expected to be responsible by the parents and maybe punished more harshly if they aren't, is birth order an actual biological phenomenon? Or is it just the most obvious, self-fulfilling prophecy ever created?
That is the million-dollar question.
Like, does the oldest child naturally develop a responsible brain, or do the parents just aggressively force them into middle management because they need help running the house?
You are hitting on exactly what modern researchers argue. The traits associated with birth order are often very real, but the causation is entirely environmental, not intrinsic to the child.
It's the parents, not the DNA.
Right. When the first child is born, the parents are anxious, inexperienced, and highly focused. They demand strict adherence to rules. But by the time the third child arrives, the parents are exhausted, their resources are divided, and they have realized that most minor interactions don't actually matter.
The environment literally changes around the child.
Exactly. The third child isn't inherently a free spirit because of their genetics. They are a free spirit because they were born into a fundamentally more relaxed regulatory environment than their older sibling.
The parents just stopped caring as much.
Well, the parents changed the curriculum based on their own fatigue and experience.
This plays perfectly into the mechanism of how parents instill values. We constantly hear that parents instill a work ethic or they instill a sense of duty. But you can't just hand someone a value, can you? It isn't an object.
No, instills is a fascinating verb because it requires an immense timeline. You cannot instill a value in an afternoon.
Definitely not.
It requires relentless, calculated repetition over years.
I've always viewed instilling values like a slow drip irrigation system for the human mind.
A slow drip irrigation system.
Yeah, think about it. If you take a dry plant and suddenly dump 5 gallons of water on it all at once, which is basically a parent screaming a list of rigid rules at a teenager, the water just pools on the surface and runs right off into the dirt.
It just washes away.
Exactly. It doesn't penetrate. But instilling is a slow, constant, agonizingly patient drop-by-drop watering.
It's the daily routine.
Right. It's the micro-corrections at the dinner table. It's the way a parent reacts to a minor failure when the kid is 6 and then 10 and 14. It's that constant low-pressure drip that eventually penetrates the soil and fundamentally alters the root system of how that person thinks.
The slow drip mechanism is exactly what creates cognitive permanence. It bypasses the child's conscious resistance because it is ambient and continuous.
It just sneaks in there.
It does. And one of the most profound things instilled through this slow drip is a connection to heritage and ancestry.
Heritage is such a heavy concept. It's the idea that your family isn't just the people in the room with you. It's this invisible line stretching back across oceans and centuries.
Heritage functions as a psychological anchor. In a highly transient, modernized world where people constantly change jobs, cities, and social circles, heritage provides a static narrative of origin.
It grounds you.
It really does. Whether it is an intense pride in an Irish immigrant background or a deep connection to an indigenous history, heritage expands the perimeter of the self. You are no longer just an isolated individual navigating the present. You are the living continuation of a historical struggle and triumph.
It gives you a broader storyline to plug your own life into. But, the reality is all this history, all this slow drip irrigation, all this forced tradition, it generates an unbelievable amount of friction.
Oh, inevitably.
Families are pressure cookers. And the most common manifestation of that friction is the generation gap.
The generation gap is the inevitable collision between the static values instilled via that slow drip irrigation 30 years ago and the rapidly accelerating velocity of the current cultural environment.
It's basically an operating system compatibility issue.
That is a great way to phrase it.
The older generation was calibrated for an environment that literally no longer exists, and the younger generation is natively adapted to an environment the older generation finds completely alien and threatening.
Which causes panic.
Yeah, we see it with technology, obviously, but it's really about shifting moral baselines, political realities, and basic definitions of success.
It is a profound structural stress test for a close-knit family. Managing a modern generation gap requires massive cognitive empathy from both sides.
It's just hard to find.
Very hard. The younger generation has to realize that the older generation's worldview is deeply rooted. I mean, it was instilled over decades, and it cannot be uninstalled overnight.
Right.
And at the same time, the older generation has to possess the humility to recognize that their lived experience is no longer the definitive template for survival. When that mutual empathy fails, the friction escalates into a structural collapse.
The falling out. The catastrophic rupture of the bond.
A falling out is not just an argument. It is the severing of the reciprocal expectation of support.
It's a complete break.
Yes. When family members stop speaking to each other for years, it is because the fundamental contract of the family, the idea that this unit provides unconditional safety, has been violated in a way that overrides the biological mandate to stay together.
But when a falling out happens in a family that really prides itself on being close-knit, does that bond ever truly heal? Or is it like a broken bone that, even when it knits back together, it always aches when it rains? How does the structure actually survive that level of internal trauma?
The repair mechanism depends entirely on the nature of the rupture. Minor ideological differences that flare up into stubborn pride can often be reset by a major life event.
Like a wedding or a funeral.
Exactly. A birth, a sudden illness, a death in the extended family. The biological imperative kicks back in and just overrides the ego.
It forces a reset.
But if the falling out is rooted in a fundamental violation of physical or emotional safety, the bond may snap permanently. And when that biological bond snaps, it forces a radical reevaluation of what a family is actually supposed to be.
Which brings us to the absolute summit of this deep dive. We have analyzed the taxonomy, the lived experience, and the friction. Now, we have to completely deconstruct the entity itself.
This is the critical pivot.
We have to question our deepest, most culturally entrenched assumptions about what actually creates a kinship bond. We are moving beyond the blueprint entirely and questioning the very nature of the materials we use to build.
To deconstruct the family, we first have to address the foundational debate of all human development, the interplay of nature versus nurture.
The classic debate.
Exactly. How much of who we are is the immutable hardware of our genetics, and how much is the software written by our environment?
Historically, society treated this as a strict binary. You were either born bad or you were raised bad. But the source material makes it clear that modern science views this as an incredibly complex, constantly shifting interplay.
It's never just one or the other.
Right. The nature provides the raw material, but the nurture acts as the catalyst.
Exactly. Genetics provide a spectrum of potential. You might have a genetic predisposition toward high anxiety or a biological aptitude for pattern recognition. But it is the environment, the family curriculum, the slow drip irrigation that determines where on that spectrum you ultimately land.
So the environment flips the switch.
It does. A stressful, chaotic upbringing might trigger the genetic potential for anxiety, turning it into a chronic condition, whereas a stable, highly supportive environment might suppress that same genetic trigger entirely.
It's not just what you are handed, it's what the environment demands of you. But, this interplay gets significantly darker and more complex when the source material introduces the concept of intergenerational trauma.
Yes, this is a very heavy topic.
Because this is where the line between nature and nurture essentially dissolves completely.
Intergenerational trauma is a revolutionary framework in both psychology and biology. It proposes that the severe traumatic experiences of one generation surviving extreme famine, systemic oppression, a war zone, or deep poverty do not just disappear when the event ends.
They don't just fade into history.
No.
Oh.
The trauma is actively passed down to subsequent generations.
The material specifically uses the word manifestation. It implies that the anxiety, the hypervigilance, or the depressive tendencies of a person living a relatively safe life today could actually be a manifestation of the unresolved trauma experienced by their grandparents 50 years ago.
What makes this so profound is that it isn't merely a psychological transmission. It isn't just a grandfather acting nervous and teaching his grandson to be nervous.
It's biological.
Through the science of epigenetics, we now understand that severe trauma can alter the chemical markers on a person's DNA. It changes how the genes express themselves.
That is just wild to think about.
The survivor's biology adapts to a high-threat environment, and they pass that hypervigilant biological setting down to their children.
The environment of the past literally reaches forward and rewrites the biological nature of the future. The trauma scars the blueprint itself.
Exactly. The grandson is born with an alarm system that is already tripped, reacting to a war that ended before he was born. Recognizing this reality completely shatters our simplistic ideas about family history.
You're getting a lot more than just a last name.
You are inheriting a biological legacy of survival and wounding.
If the biological reality is that complex, then our societal models for how families should look are probably vastly oversimplified as well, which really forces us to look at the archetype we worship above all others in modern Western society.
The nuclear family.
The mother, the father, the children, isolated in their own private house.
The deconstruction of the nuclear family is essential here. For the last century, this model has been held up as the universal biological ideal of human flourishing. But sociologists and anthropologists point out that the isolated nuclear family is actually a massive historical aberration.
It's an anomaly. Like, if you look at deep human history or even cross-cultural models today, the idea of two adults taking on the entire burden of economic survival, psychological support, and child rearing completely alone is wildly inefficient.
It's almost impossible.
Humans evolved in multi-generational households, in tribal bands, in extended communal networks, where the labor of survival and child rearing was distributed across a dozen adults.
The isolated nuclear family is largely a byproduct of the Industrial Revolution, where labor demands fractured extended networks, forcing smaller, highly mobile family units to follow factory work into cities.
So it was an economic shift.
Completely. We took an economic adaptation and mistakenly codified it as a moral and biological imperative. We mistook a temporary housing trend for the absolute definition of a home.
And once you realize the structure itself is just a temporary cultural phase, you have to look at the actual connective tissue that holds the people inside it together. Just to look at the definition of the bond itself.
And this is the most critical shift in the entire deep dive.
The historical reliance on consanguinity.
Consanguinity. It is a very clinical term for a very emotional concept.
It is.
It literally means blood ties.
Yeah.
Being descended from a common biological ancestor. For thousands of years, consanguinity, alongside legal marriage, was the sole defining metric for legitimate kinship. If you shared blood, you were family. If you didn't, you were outsiders.
Consanguinity is an endowment. You don't earn it. You don't work for it. You are simply born into it by sheer genetic lottery.
A total roll of the dice.
And historically, society said that endowment was enough to demand absolute loyalty. But the paradigm is shifting radically now. The material argues that we are moving away from consanguinity and toward defining family by reciprocal bonds.
Reciprocal bonds are the active daily practice of mutual love, shared care, and ultimate responsibility. It is a bond that is given and returned in equal measure.
If consanguinity is an endowment, like a massive inheritance of genetic relation that you get just for being born, then reciprocal bonds are a salary.
I love that comparison.
You have to actively earn it every single day through your actions, your support, and your presence. You can have a massive endowment of shared DNA with a sibling, but if you don't do the daily work of earning the salary of mutual care, the relationship bankrupts itself. It ceases to function as a family.
That is a phenomenal economic metaphor for emotional labor. An endowment requires no effort, but it guarantees no warmth.
Exactly.
A biological relative who provides no reciprocal care is merely a genetic coincidence. They are just a trivia fact on your ancestry chart. The realization that the active practice of care is more vital than the passive fact of blood has given rise to the most crucial evolution in modern kinship.
The chosen family.
Yes, the chosen family.
People who have absolutely zero consanguinity, zero biological endowment, but who have built an ironclad network of reciprocal bonds. The text notes this is particularly vital for people who are estranged from their biological relatives.
Estrangement is the ultimate failure of the consanguineous endowment. It is the active, painful, deliberate severing of the blood tie, usually necessitated by abuse, profound incompatibility, or a deeply toxic environment.
It's a survival tactic.
It is. When a person is estranged, they are essentially cast out of the biological safety net. The chosen family is the survival mechanism that catches them.
Wait, I need to challenge this because this is where the language gets incredibly contested in society.
Okay, lay it out.
If we redefine the word family to mean any group of people who simply share strong reciprocal bonds of care, doesn't the word completely lose its structural meaning?
That is the traditionalist argument, yes.
I mean, if I have a group of 4 incredibly loyal, deeply supportive friends, why do we feel the need to co-opt the word family? Why aren't they just what they actually are, phenomenal ride-or-die friends? Does stretching the word family to cover non-biological networks dilute the specific gravity of the word itself?
This is exactly the debate raging in sociological circles right now. Traditionalists argue that expanding the definition dilutes the taxonomy. But advocates for the chosen family make a functionalist argument.
Which means what, exactly?
They argue that if a network of people is performing the exact functional duties that a biological family is supposed to perform, caring for you during a severe illness, pooling financial resources during a crisis, providing unconditional psychological safety, and serving as your emergency contacts, then calling them friends is a massive linguistic downgrade.
It doesn't capture the stakes.
Exactly. In our culture, the word friend implies a relationship of convenience and shared interests, which can fade without severe social penalty.
You can just drift apart from a friend.
Right. But the word family carries a societal weight of permanence, ultimate priority, and non-negotiable obligation. By claiming the title of chosen family, these networks are not diluting the word. They're demanding the cultural respect, the societal recognition, and the gravitas that they have actively earned through their reciprocal labor.
They are saying, we are doing the grueling daily work of earning the salary, so we demand the title that comes with the job.
That's exactly what they're saying.
That completely reframes the concept for me. It means that embracing the chosen family isn't just a trendy sociological buzzword or, a coping mechanism. It is a highly sophisticated evolutionary step in human bonding.
It's an upgrade.
It is the recognition that humans have the capacity to build the ultimate architectural structures of survival out of pure, intentional love and mutual action, rather than just relying on the passive luck of genetic obligation.
It is the pinnacle of the evolution we have mapped out today. We have moved from a rigid, unfeeling blueprint of biological obligations to a dynamic, intentionally constructed network of mutual survival. We are finally recognizing that family is not a static object you are handed. It is a fluid, evolving reality you build.
So let's synthesize this massive psychological and sociological journey we just took.
But we covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We started at the absolute baseline, looking at the strict architectural taxonomy, the immediate and extended nodes, the static coordinates that map our existence but fail to tell our story.
The blueprint.
Yes, the blueprint. We then stepped inside the house and analyzed the lived experience. The friction of the environment versus the active curriculum of being brought up, the tribal obsession with genetic continuity, the scheduled maintenance of traditions, and the chaotic diplomatic negotiations of merging in-laws.
The verbs.
Exactly. We analyzed the hidden mechanics, realizing that birth order is shaped by changing parental environments, and that values are instilled through agonizingly slow drip irrigation. We stared down the generation gap and the structural collapse of a falling out.
And then we took the whole thing apart. We dismantled the binary of nature versus nurture, revealing the profound biological scarring of intergenerational trauma.
That part is still blowing my mind.
It's heavy. We exposed the isolated nuclear family as a historical anomaly rather than a biological mandate. And finally, we realized that the true engine of human kinship is not the passive endowment of consanguinity, but the actively earned salary of reciprocal bonds.
Which is a realization that makes the chosen family the ultimate expression of human connection.
The people we choose to call family sit at the exact intersection of our deepest, most vulnerable personal narratives and the most profound sociological shifts in human history.
They absolutely do.
And as we close this analysis, I strongly encourage you, the listener, to audit your own ecosystem. Look at the people surrounding you right now. both the ones you share blood with and the ones you've chosen. Look past the basic taxonomy and examine the mechanics.
Do an inventory.
Right. Which reciprocal bonds are you actively paying the salary on every day, and which ones are you letting coast on an old biological endowment? What values are you slowly dripping into the soil of the people you influence?
And I want to leave you with one final lingering question to turn over in your mind long after this deep dive ends. We've spent an hour establishing that our definition of family is rapidly and relentlessly evolving away from strict biological bloodlines and heavily toward intentional reciprocal networks of mutual care.
It's a huge shift.
It is. So if this trajectory continues, what will the concept of a family tree actually look like in 100 years? When future generations sit down to map their origins, will they abandon the genetic blueprint entirely? Will they map their emotional lineages, their chosen networks, and their survival bonds with the exact same historical reverence and structural detail that we currently reserve only for our DNA?
That is a profound thought.
It really makes you wonder what kind of roots you are actually putting down right now. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.